I want to ask you a question that sounds simple, but it's actually one of the most confronting questions that any leader can sit with. Do you believe that your presence here in this role, in this season, with this specific combination of gifts, experiences, and your history, do you believe it was all planned? I don't mean hoped for, I don't mean fortunate, I mean planned deliberately in advance by someone who saw the world you would lead in well before you arrived in it. Well, I'm asking this question because the answer to that question does not just affect how you feel about yourself, it affects every decision that you make. Every room you walk into, every risk that you would take, or maybe even refuse to take, and every time you might shrink back yourself or choose not to shrink back. Well, welcome back to the Now Woman podcast. And we're continuing our Now Woman leadership series. We've already talked about who you are when nobody's watching. We've talked about the battle for your mind as a leader, the lies that leaders believe, the performance trap, and the borrowed identity. Today, though, we're going to look at the foundation underneath all of that. You are made on purpose. And today we talk about what all that means. Not, I don't mean a spiritual nicety, but as a leadership conviction that truly changes everything for you. Let's get into it. Purpose is one of those overused words in leadership and, frankly, personal development. It appears on vision boards, conferences, banners, coaching programs, and it's because it appears everywhere. It really has started to mean very little. So I'm going to be very specific about what I mean and what I don't mean. So when I say you're made on purpose, I don't mean that like your life was always, or that your life will always make sense, that your path will always be clear, or that your calling will feel very obvious. Far from it. Purpose doesn't eliminate, the seasons where there is little clarity or maybe even confusion. It doesn't protect you from, pain in your life either, or hurtful experiences in your lives. It does not guarantee a straight line as far as life is concerned. But what I mean is this: before you were born, God considered the world, and He knew that the world would need from you specifically your specific combination of gifts, your wiring, your story, your capacity, and He designed you accordingly. Your purpose was not assigned after you proved yourself because, frankly, there's nothing to prove. Your purpose is embedded in you before you even have the opportunity to do anything at all. This is fundamentally different starting point when it comes to leadership because most leaders lead from a question like, am I enough for this? The now woman, though, leads from conviction, as in, I was made for this. And most leaders generally would build towards, being worthy or worthiness. But the now woman builds from, I am worthy already. I am already established by God. I'm here on purpose. And I don't have to earn any of this. I don't have to earn the space to be in this world because God thought about me before I was even born. The difference between these two postures usually determines everything about us as a woman who leads. Now, when we read, the Bible, Ephesians 2:10, it talks about the fact that we'll fulfill the destiny that God has given to each of us because we're joined, to Jesus. He is the anointed one. We're joined to him. And even before we were born, God planned well in advance our destiny and the good works that we would do to fulfill it. So I want you to read that again, perhaps maybe slowly this time. You were planned in advance, not discovered after the fact, not assigned, once you proved your readiness or anything. You were planned before you even arrived. You can read it pretty much as a leadership brief because that's exactly what it is. That verse in Ephesians 2:10. You have a destiny. It was considered well before you were formed. The good works, the specific contributions, the specific impact, the specific gap in the world where you were designed to fail. All of it was planned in advance. And this is not a comfort verse, it's a commissioning verse, if you will. It's like you're commissioning, proclamation. And that any leader who reads it, you just you just can't help but to stop asking, the question, do I belong in this room? You stop asking all those questions. And then instead you begin to ask, what have I been sent into this room to do? Why is that? Because when you read that, you know that you are predestined, for a greater purpose and for good works, then you know that everything and every stage of your life has a purpose to it. Now, when you think about the architect or before a single brick is laid or before you break ground, right? Or any worker even sets foot on the site, the architect would have already designed the building in full. You have this idea, I want to have this house, there's many rooms, maybe two-story, three, it doesn't matter. Whatever dream you have for that home, the architect is the one who designs the building in full. He designs the dimensions, the materials, the structural requirements, the load-bearing walls, the placement even of every window. And the building doesn't arrive on site. And then, you have to figure out, okay, hey, how's it gonna be? No, the building is designed with intention long before the construction begins. And the architect doesn't design a building for a site without considering the specific environment, maybe the climate, the cell conditions, the surrounding landscape, the specific purpose the build will serve. You are designing the same way, even more so, not for a generic world, but for this specific one, in this specific time, for a specific purpose that was considered before the first brick of your life was even laid. There's a measurable difference between, the leader who believes you arrive here by circumstances or, I've had to work really, really hard, and the leader who believes that she is, sent in that place and that time in that season for a specific purpose with intention. It shows up in how you make decisions, how you might even handle a position, how you respond to failure, and how you develop the people around you even. If you're a leader who believes that your presence is circumstantial, then a number of things are bound to happen, like asking for, permission more so than perhaps exercising, your freedom and authority, or influence as a leader. Sometimes might treat opportunities as luck rather than, hey, this is really well in alignment because of the calling or because of, what God has purpose for me to, right? Maybe she might interpret the position as confirmation that I don't belong here, rather than like seeing it even as sometimes evidence that sometimes you're building something that's worth opposing, because that is very true. Sometimes when you're doing something that's, transformationally impactful, you will face opposition, right? And so if you see that opposition as, hey, like you're not worth it, then you completely missed the bigger picture. When things get hard, don't think, well, I was never meant to be doing that. No, life gets difficult for all of us. Nobody has an easy life, right? And difficulty in life is not a reason to quit. So on the other hand, the leader who believes that God has a purpose for her, that I was created for good works, and that there was a greater picture and a purpose and an intentionality behind God creating me. They lead differently. They're not afraid to um, lead from that place of the influence that they have with confidence, not arrogance or pride, but with just that confidence. Because when you know that God has a purpose for your life, you understand that the influence, the confidence, all of those things are entrusted to you because you need it for the journey ahead. When you have a position, you see that, hey, this is valuable information because it shows you where there is resistance and, and not necessarily, hey, I've got to be present or I shouldn't be, right? And when difficult times come, it's all part of the design. And also because you would know that, for whatever God has created you for, it's worth having that, you know, con con contesting. You're willing to develop other people around you, in a generous way. Because when you know that God has a purpose for you, when you know your purpose, you can't be threatened by other people discovering theirs. And I had this once, if you're not generous about praising, celebrating others, then you're really living from a place of fear. Now, if we think about Florence Nightingale, she was born into a wealthy English family in the, 1800s, at a time when nursing was considered like beneath really a woman of her social standing. And her family opposed her fiercely. The medical establishment of her era did not take her seriously. The condition she encountered in the Crimean War was designed to break anyone who was not absolutely certain of their purpose. And yet she reduced the mortality rate in her hospital from 42% to 2%. Not through luck or circumstances, but being relentlessly purpose driven, right? In the application of her gift, right? Statistical analysis, the way she thought, her compassion as a leader, and what I would call an iron-willed conviction that she was in exactly the right place. And she later founded modern nursing education and influenced public health globally. She didn't arrive at her purpose after the, doors opened, but it's because of her purpose that opened those doors. And that, my friends, is what a convinced and a iron-willed conviction brings. That's what a woman who's convicted about her purpose looks like. So some, thoughts or signs to help us where because we all can sometimes fall into that trap of not necessarily knowing, or sometimes I would say even signs of being misaligned. So some honest indicators, not to judge you or anything, but just use as diagnostics. Do you feel frequently like an imposter? Maybe you suffer from imposter syndrome. As if any moment somebody's going to realize that you don't actually belong in maybe the position that you're in. Do you make decisions based on what is safe rather than what's right? Right? Do you compare yourself to others and feel perpetually behind? Right? Do you resist like committing fully to your own vision? Like, do you feel like you're holding something back or maybe keeping an exit available because deep down you're not sure that you're really meant for something. Or maybe you find it generally difficult to articulate why you do what you do beyond practical or professional reasons. Um, I don't know. These are just some thoughts in terms of recognizing where you are. So why do we struggle to believe that we were made on purpose? Well, because for most women, the struggle to believe in purpose is not necessarily an intellectual one, right? It's not always easy to ascend to Ephesians 2:10 as like, something that is meant to be grasped, lived through. It's easy to nod your head, yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe even might by me saying to you that God has a plan for your life. The struggle we all face is personal, to each one of us. Because to believe something you specifically have to choose. You know what? I'm gonna believe that. It's like when somebody says they love you, you have to choose to believe it, right? You have to choose to believe it. And because you're made on purpose for something quite significant, it really does require of you a certain level of self-acceptance. And most of the time, we don't give, ourselves that permission. We feel like we've not been given that permission. And that I think, is part of our mindset. And so I want to kind of like, break down a little bit of that mindset down for us. And I think it's because we've been taught that sometimes ambition is dangerous, particularly maybe for women or, even more so for women of faith. We've been told that believing in in the fact that, hey, you're a person of significance is arrogance. Well, the fact is when you deny the fact that you're a person of significance is rather ingratitude. You're saying to God that, like his vision for you doesn't count, right? And sometimes there's that confusion between humility with smallness, thinking that like, hey, to be humble means I have to, squash myself. But surely true humility is simply knowing whose you are, what you are and what you're not, and without distorting either of these two. And sometimes it's, the mindset's because we've accumulated enough failure, maybe rejection, maybe disappointment. And so to build against our own purpose becomes a lot easier. And then it's like you used to just, use that to justify just staying small when you are not designed to be small. Again, when we read the Bible, God tells us that He knows the plans He has for us to prosper us, not to harm us, to give us hope and a future. So if God is saying that He has plans to give us a future and hope, then like that plan exists regardless of whether you're ready, not ready. The only question is whether or not you will align yourself with them, right? Will you align yourself with the plans God has for you? If you have a vision that you've been sitting on, maybe in your journal for years, or maybe every year you find a reason why there's not yet the moment to pursue it, then I think it's time to look yourself a bit more in the mirror because it means most likely you're diminishing the purpose for which you were created. Maybe you invest in developing everyone else's purpose whilst yours remains at a level of just some vague intention rather than, hey, I'm actively pursuing my purpose. Well, these patterns are not necessarily a sign of laziness or a lack of faith. It's just a sign that, hey, we haven't or you haven't fully reconciled yourself to the idea that the significant thing you sense inside of you is not there by accident, but it's actually there by design. So some thoughts to, think through some questions. If you genuinely believe that your purpose was planned before you were born, that specific gap that you're here to fill, and that God considered it in advance. If you genuinely believed it, what would you do differently in the next 90 days? Where have you been treating, who God has called you as a possibility, like rather than some conviction? What does it cost you? Maybe in time, maybe resources, maybe the impact you haven't yet produced. I don't know. And what is the version of your purpose that you've been allowing yourself to want, but not fully own? Because there's a difference between, allowing something or thinking something, but not fully owning it. What would it mean to stop holding that at arm's length? And what has your hesitation by your own purpose cost you? Maybe not even just you, but the people who are waiting for what it is that is inside of you. So, some challenges as always, because every week we give you some challenges. And it's like, I wanted to write out Ephesians 2:10 by hand, right? And then underneath it, write these sentences, three sentences, just three sentences that completes it. The specific good works I was planned in advance to do include dash, dash, and dash. I don't mean, do this and, some aspiration or some, no, no, no. You have to do this in earnest recognition of what you already know your purpose includes. And then identify what in decision where you've been delaying because you're really not fully convinced that they have the right to make it. Okay. And make it this week from that place of conviction that tells you that you were planned for this, you were made for this. And not because you're feeling ready for it, but because readiness doesn't, readiness follows conviction, doesn't precede it. Okay. It's really important. And then tell one person this week what you're actually doing. I don't mean the safe version, but I mean the full version. Own it out loud. And notice what happens when you stop. Like, that ingratitude, that sense of I'm nothingness. Okay. Write out Ephesians 2:10. Read it out loud every single time. And then when you're tempted to kind of like minimize who God has called you to be, stop. Stop and go back to that verse and remember. Practice owning the purpose for which you were created for. Bring it into conversations this week. Even if you're not used to it, maybe in just small ways. And keep a purpose, what I call a purpose evidence log this week. So something happens that perhaps maybe confirms a calling, maybe a conversation, an outcome, a connection, or an unexpected door. Write it down. Because the more you take notice of what, is happening in your life, the more it fills you with gratitude in knowing that God is building, He's really bringing to pass the word that He's spoken over you. And above all, remember, the verse in Jeremiah 29:11. It's not conditional on your performance. It's already something that God says. That's His plan. It's established. Just align yourself to it because it's already there for you. Yeah. So some quotes to think about. You are not designed a purpose, right? As an afterthought. No. God gave you one before you even had the chance to. Okay. And denying your significance is not humility, it's ingratitude. And, ingratitude makes it look like I'm being modest. And God's plan for your life exists regardless of your readiness. The question It's only whether you will align yourself with them. And finally, our food for thought is there's a woman in your world right now who's waiting for you to become that fully purposeful leader you are designed to be. Not this cautious version, not this, you know, um, qualified version, not the version that holds back just to be safe. No, I mean the full version. That woman, she's waiting because what you carry, your specific story, your wisdom, the specific way in which, you have been wired. That's exactly what that person needs to move forward in their own calling. And every day that you're delaying owning your own purpose is a day longer that that person is having to wait. And remember, you're not leading yourself alone. You are never meant to. And your purpose will always be bigger than you, which is precisely why God planned it well before you arrived. When a locksmith spends, weeks crafting a key, he considers the specific lock it will open, its specific dimensions, its unique mechanism, the exact combination of cuts and edges required. The key doesn't choose its lock after it's made. It's designed for it. And the lock does not open for any other key, only the one that was made to fit it. You're the key, and the purpose and the assignment God has for your life is the lock. And you are not made generically for any door that would have you. You are specifically made with precision and intention for the exact doors you are designed to open. So stop trying to fit locks you are not made for, and stop, standing outside the lock that you are made for, wondering if you have what it takes. You are made for this, and that's the entire point. What lock were you made to open? What's stopping you from turning that key? If this episode has a little bit confronted you or, graced you a little bit, don't settle back into comfort. Take some action this week. And then also remember to subscribe to the podcast, and whether on, whatever platform you're listening to on YouTube, just so that you don't miss anything. And leave us a review. It makes it all the more worthwhile. Think of the woman you can share this with. Perhaps somebody you know who's, sitting on the threshold when it comes to the purpose, or maybe they haven't yet walked through. Send it to them. You never know. Now, next week, we're going to close out with what I call declaration episode, rooted. And we're going to look at what it means to be rooted, what it means to live from a settled identity, and the commitment that the now woman takes and makes to herself, to the calling, and to the women who are coming right behind her. Until I see you on Tuesday, remember you were made on purpose, so lead like it. Until then, stay faithful, stay focused, stay bold, and above all, be all in. And that's all for this week.